Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining today's Lunch and Learn. My name is Will Pedersen. I run our customer org here. Give everyone a few minutes to join before we kick off. As always, you can use raise hand function and we'll call on you. You can type a question in the chat or you can type a question in the Q&A, all of the above. Okay, and here we go. All right, so Krushi, what do you have for us today?
I had asked this question to Eric, I guess on Thursday or Wednesday, I'm not sure, last week.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not receive any a meeting invitation for the same. The question was if we have millions of data, and in that data, if I'm paginating, I'm processing only 1,000 records at a time, and that I need to group by the data. So if the first, if I'm grouping by and the first record is on the first page and the second is on the fourth page, on the 4,000 row, so how will I deal with that problem?
Do you have a report, and that report has over 1,000 rows, and you're grouping that report, and you trying to get the group totals for the whole report, not just what's on the current page?
So I'll suppose I have a lot, I have a 1 million record. And after grouping by, I need to group them up, and then I need to, after grouping by, I need to process them according to the logic. So whatever the logic will be performed, that will go after the grouping.
Right.
And I cannot process 1 million record at a time because it's blocking the server. So so if I'm grouping by, and if I am dividing 1 million into 1,000 rows, so if the first record is on the first, if there is a group and the first record is on the first page and the second is on the fourth page, so how will I deal with that problem?
Yeah, let's see here. Let me create a folder and we can talk through some ideas. Okay, so the first thought, looks like it's the first time, sorry, it's the first time I've created a flow since I upgraded to 8.2. Nicer. There's this step here called ForEach In Group Step. Now let's assume I'm just going to use a folder here as my type as an example. And so here's ForEach in group. Now with this step, what this does is, if we contrast this with a regular ForEach step, a regular ForEach step takes a list in. So let me put folder here as well so we can compare and contrast. Normal ForEach takes in a list and it outputs a single item. So we take in a list of folders and we output each folder in the order that list comes in, and we loop through all of those items. A ForEach in group step takes in a list, but it outputs a list as well, and it outputs a list grouped by some field that you've defined. So based on the type you specify, you can get a list here. So let's say I was going to do this by entity folder ID. I wanted to loop all the folders, and I wanted to deal with each folder based on, I wanted to group them by their parent folder ID. So coming out of this flow, I would have a list of folders all grouped by the same folder ID. And so you could see, let's see. If we could actually look at the difference here just to make this clear. just a minute. I'm going to show the execution count differences here, so you can see the differences really quickly. So bear with me just a minute. Self setup here. What I'm going to do is fetch all the folders on my local here. Okay. Excuse me, folder. All right, great. I'm going to pass those folders into my collection, which is in entity results here. And then for each, I'm also going to pass in entity results. If I debug this, what you'll notice is the ForEach In Group Step has 453 executions. Let me pause my notifications here. And the ForEach step has 2,400. So this is grouping by that entity folder ID and letting me deal with all of those folders. So this could be by account number or by social security number or by month or whatever that property is. The ForEach In Group step knows the type that you've specified here. And this drop-down list is going to be all the properties available for that particular data type. So that's part one, I think, of your question, which is how do you group the objects in your list by some shared property value? Any questions on that part? I'm going to answer, I think, what the second part of your question is here momentarily, just to be clear.
Oh, yeah, this is clear to me. Well,
okay. Now, your other question is, like, if you run this and you can't, what you need to try to do is run these possibly in parallel, or you need to, you can't wait for this flow to finish, right? Because this 450 or this 2,400 is actually in the millions. And so you want to group by a property and then process those all together. So one option, depending on the volume you need, is to use a thing called a async subflow. So if I come down here and go to my flows category, there is a step here called start linked flow async. And if you contrast this with a regular flow, you'll notice this has a slightly different design where it has this clock icon on it. And so what you can do is this flow spawns off a background process. And so you can have a flow loop through a large list and then spawn these background processes from that list. And they will be deposited into the thread jobs report and then worked in sequentially by the background process. So if a user is submitting a big list, you may not want them through like maybe they're uploading an Excel file or something. You don't want that user to sit there and wait for that to complete. You want to push that off onto the back, onto the back end and let it take as much time as it might need to process that particular request. And that's what this does. So like, for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a regular flow here first, and I'm going to delete these other steps just to kind of clean up our example here.
but when I try to like download, like fetch all the data all at once, like there can be like 10-15 million records, and if I'm trying to fetch all at once, it's crashing the server, and this is not like it's not working. The ForEach group step is not working because I cannot fetch everything at once, and I need to, like, I'm using offset, and I have to fetch it like 1,000 after 1,000. So yeah, so that's causing the problem. The dividing the records, that's causing the problem.
Well, do you know, like, ahead of time what the values you want to fetch by, or the properties that you want to fetch by?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
What is it that requires you? Why do you have to load all 10 or 15 million into memory at once? Like, what's the is there? I guess the question I would say is like, what can we do to not have to load so much data in at once? You're using offsets right now, so you're implementing some sort of paging, right?
Yes.
In like, or with some sort of SQL based step.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but if I'll not like, suppose if I'm like dividing it into 1,000,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not working because first record is coming on the first page and the second is
Mm-hmm.
on the third page. So it's
Like
not
what?
grouping by. The groups are getting divided
Yeah.
into two, three parts.
No, yeah, I understand that. But like what are you grouping on? What's the thing? What's the property that you're trying to group on in your data set?
It's a number.
Like an account number or something?
Yes, kind of.
Okay. Well, what if you did what if you, instead of trying to get the whole list, what if you did like what I would probably do is something, I'll use a raw SQL step, but I would probably use the query step. Like, what if I wanted a list of all entity folder IDs? So I could write a query that would do like a distinct, right? I could get a distinct. I'm just going to use my folder example here, but you would replace this with your specific, right? So here's entity folder ID, from entity folder. If I run this step, let me here a bit. If I run this step, let me output data, and I'll just say data rows for now. Oops. If I run this, I should get a list of unique entity folder IDs. What I could then do is something like this. Bring this over here. Now I could pair these together. So here in my previous example, I was using fetch entities and I was fetching everything from the folder table. But I could then pair this distinct step with a for each. And then to the for each, I could pass each ID. Right? I'm just going to put another create data step here since we're making things a little muddy. I'm going to move these. Let me disconnect these and move these around. Oh, good Lord. Actually, this needs to go back. Let's assume, I'll just say this is where we process. So now here, again, I'll pass in my dynamic data row. So I'm going to loop my dynamic data rows and get an item back. And then on fetch entities, instead of fetching all folders, I'll add a fetch criteria. And here I'll set entity folder ID equals, and that'll give me a new property here. And then what I'll do is take item field. This is just, I wouldn't do this with dynamic data rows. This might be a little confusing, but it's just easiest to demonstrate. And I'll take the value from the text value from the ID. Now I have a distinct list of all IDs in my table. I'll loop that list. For each ID, I'll fetch the records with the same ID, and then I'll pass those records to be processed and go to the next ID and continue that loop, something like that. That way you don't have to try to load all 15 million records into memory at once. Now, probably with a big enough data set, we would probably want to put this work into some async subflow so that we don't have all that memory and we don't have all those records in memory at the same time. And that's where we would actually look at using, again, if I brought that step back, that start linked flow async, we would probably take these two steps and we would put them in an async subflow and let the back end process those as a, does that make sense?
Yes, kind of.
Does,
But
go ahead.
so you mean that this fetch entities will fetch everything according to the for each, like
Yeah.
what's in their item? Can you try running it once?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. No results. Oh, that's probably expected. Not all folders are going to have subfolders. Yeah. So again, if you look at here, what we're doing is we're just running a SQL command, and we're saying, give me all of the distinct IDs for a particular column from a particular table, right? And then you can see all the IDs that come back. And then what we're doing is we're saying, so if we look at this, we look at our input output data. So our input is that whole collection. There's 456 unique IDs. And then it's going to pass out one ID at a time. This one just happens to be null. Right. Then we take that ID. Let's look at a better example. So again, I'll expand this, collapse my collection. So here's our entity folder ID. Toolbox folder ID is the folder ID. And then if we look at 453? Hey, look at that. And then we pass that toolbox folder ID into our fetch entity step because we've added the appropriate fetch criteria. And that gives us back 5 items. So now we have those 5 items that share that same ID. And we can process those according to whatever logic we need to. So in this way, especially if we take these 2 steps right here, if we take these 2 steps and we put them in an async subflow, we won't ever have, we will process these one after the other. And that way we'll never have all of we will never load all 15 million rows into memory. We'll load each and release each set of data as these flows get processed by the backend thread here. And what we could do is we could create a flow for this, right? I'll create a new one and I'll call this process each folder grouping, right? Because I'm using folders here in my example. And then what would I do? I'd come here and I'd add a piece of input data called current folder ID or something. And then I'd set this up kind of the same exact way. I'd bring my fetch entity step, right? And then I would set my type name as folder. Now that I've set that, I can come add fetch criteria. Now, if your data is not locally, you might have to use database table integrations or access patterns instead of fetch criteria here. But the general pattern should be the same. Am I helping you? Am I making sense? Are you following along?
Yes.
And then we could pass current folder ID. And then again, we would do some kind of processing, whatever that processing needs to be. It would be here. And then what we would do is we would replace these steps with our async flow here. And then we would just map in our new ID. And there it is, item, again, field 1, text value. And now when we run this, it's going to run basically immediately. But what we would see, if I duplicate my tab here and come down to, I'm going to find the thread jobs report. So here it is, system administration, system tools, event viewer. Now on the event viewer is a tab here along the top. If I go to more and I find thread jobs, and here's our thread jobs. And I should be able to, if I rerun this again, quickly catch these things. Oh, they're probably already processed. Yeah, they're very fast. But we create a new queue of work here. If I can collapse these, we'll create a new queue of work here. Let me see if I can run this. Maybe we try to spawn. I'm going to try to do a couple runs of this really quick and see if I can't show you this stuff. No? Stink. They're moving too fast. They're processing so fast because there's nothing happening there.
And Eric, this is like for if I have a group by only like 1 parameter, this will work. But if I want to group by three parameters, then how will it work?
Well, you can add multiple fetch criteria. Well, like you mean like you can write SQL queries to give you multiple things, multiple distincts, right? There's nothing specific to decisions here, I don't think. We do need to lean on a little bit of SQL knowledge to be able to do that.
Okay, Eric.
Does this help you at all?
Yes.
Okay, now we post these videos online so you could watch this later if you wanted to re-review. But I think getting a list of unique IDs, fetching those unique IDs, or use SQL to break your list up into get the unique IDs you need. and then pass each of those unique ID or group of 3 properties, whatever it might be, into an async subflow for processing. And that will prevent you from trying to load all of the information into memory at once.
Oh, sure.
And then,
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
okay, you bet. Happy to help. Okay. Right, so it looks like we have a question from Kasi here. Okay, I have a couple questions here, I think. Let me see. Oh, sorry, I think Radley, apologies, Cassie. Radley was up here first. I think I'm getting out of order. Apologies, just a moment. Okay, all right, so question from Radley. Can the main form control the visibility of controls on the repeater form? For example, a selection of domestic or international travel should control the visibility of the passport number field for each traveler on the repeater. Yeah, it absolutely can. You just have to treat these as inputs to the data repeater. See if we can't validate that. So what we're going to do is build a flow. Yep. And in that flow, we're going to put a form. And we're going to create a new form. And we're going to delete this grid and put a button and come to user controls and drag a data repeater on here. And then we're going to pick or create a data repeater, create new, create. All right. And so here, I'm just going to have 2 labels. Now, first things first, my input type, I'll pick, excuse me, I'm going to pick a count for my data type here. So I have that. And then I'm going to go to my labels, and I'll say pick text from data, and I'll make the first label the email address. I'll make the second label, I don't know, created by, something I know has value. Just going to get myself set up here to try to walk you through this. So bear with me just a sec. Here's my data name. This will be called DR items. And everything else looks fine. Okay, I'm going to put a fetch entity step in here. And I'll set that fetch entity step to type account. Pass entity results, which is the output of that, into my data repeater. And I will ignore selected items number, debug. And okay, there's the list of the accounts in my system. So let me edit my form here, and I'll put a check called show created. And what I'm going to do is edit my data repeater, and I'm going to go to properties here, and I'm going to add an active form. Are you on version 7, 8, 7 or 8, or are you on a version 6 or below, Radley?
Yeah, I'm on version 8.
Okay, great. So I'm going to add an active form flow here. This will be called hide created by, and I'm going to edit this rule flow here. And I need to create an input. So bear with me just a minute here. I forgot to do that. So I need to create an input. And to do that, I'm going to add a new active form flow input here called value. I'll just call it value of checkbox or something like that. And this will be a Boolean. Okay, and so back into my active form flow here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a true or false rule. And what we're going to do is select from flow. And we need to find that data. How do we get at that data? An item index. That's the current form data, trigger component, all items list, current item. How do I get custom data into my data repeater now? What does this do? Just a sec. Oh, I know we can do this. I'm struggling to figure out how to pass data into the repeater from the parent form right now. I might have to figure that part out and report back to you. To your first let me answer I can answer your second question. It's pretty straightforward to do, but not necessarily intuitive. Like right now, if I run this flow, I'm getting all of the accounts in the in this repeater. But what I could do is I could change this from select from flow, and in my flow, I could say possibly build array, and then say constant on the account here.
Okay.
And then I'm not going to define anything. I'm just going to leave it empty. Now, at which point, if I run this again, I should get, that's not going to show right. So let me put a text box or something on my data repeater. So this is more of a meaningful example. I'm going to make this text box bind to like first name or something. So it should show no matter what. So what I'm doing here is actually using mapping to give me my first blank item, if that makes any sense. Instead of passing everything in, I'm just going to say, oh, declare an empty item. And then, of course, if you look at your form and you look under user controls, you can put add and remove buttons.
Yep.
To manually add these. Now, if these aren't, one thing we'll see is depending on what you need, if this isn't sufficient, you might start looking at using like event buttons, and these can actually run flows for you that give pop-up dialogues over top of your form. So if you need full control over the user experience and you want to put validation and other things before something gets added into your data repeater list, you might want to look at using these event buttons. I'm sorry, not event buttons. Sorry, not event buttons. Sub dialog is what I'm looking for. Sub dialog button. A sub dialog button can run a whole flow for you, and so you'll get the most control over your user experience using this sub dialog button, and you can feed the data from that back into your repeater and cause it to refresh.
Excellent.
To your question though about how to get data into the data repeater, I know with certainty we can do this. I'm just failing right now on figuring out how to make that available to this. Get that. If I was using the old ways, like if I was using an old visibility rule, I could just declare input data and I'd get that as input data. I was assuming my active form flow data was going to give me that, but it doesn't appear to be giving me anything. So I'm not. what I'm supposed to do there. Let me really quickly ask, since we're on the call, if anyone knows how to do this internally. Just bear with me just a minute. Yeah, so let me actually follow up with you about question one offline here. There's something I'm missing, and it's been a while. I'm not really up to speed on form design stuff as much as some of the service team guys are. Let me just ping someone, and then I'll follow back on email for you.
Awesome,
I'm
appreciate
sure
that, Will.
there's just something easy I'm missing, but I'll get you an answer here. Easy.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Now, are you good on the question number 2 though?
Yep, that looks great. That's a great way to do that. Just was not thinking about that.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
You bet. Happy to help. All right, and so here we go. All right, so Kasi, apologies for that little bit of back and forth. Is there a way to pass a key value pairs to decisions like Java has HashMap or Python dictionary? You help me understand your question a little bit better?
Yeah, like, I mean, I know we can define data types in decisions and pass that structure of data, but I was wondering if we could just pass dynamic key value pairs and then use them like how we would use in Java or Python, those hash maps or dictionaries.
Yeah, we do. There's a couple options here. Now, are you calling a flow? Like, how are you calling this flow? Are you calling it as a REST service?
Yeah.
So the first thing you might want to look at is a concept. I'm just going to open up our doc site. Is post to flow handler. If I search post, you'll see post to flow handler behavior. I'm going to put this in the chat here as well, so that you can quickly get this. Post to flow handler is our like generic REST. You know, it doesn't have a concept of like a normal flow. You come in, like I'm sure you're alluding to, you come in and you edit the inputs on your flow with either simple types or a composite data type. And then when you go to integration details, you can then see the JSON or XML representation of that type. But our post to flow handler allows you to pass raw data, and it gives you it'll give you some of the data as query string or data pair data. So if I were to create a new flow here and go to advanced and scroll down, I should be able to find post to flow handler.
Is that
this
newer version? I think we are on 7.
No, this has been around for a very long time. This is not new.
Okay.
I'm just working in the newest version. But if you're to look at Data Explorer inside of call data here, which is the post data, you'll get a query string or request headers or payload data. And then that comes in as either XML or JSON data. And then you can use serialized steps or object steps or get data pair from type steps, all of the above to interact with that data. But you don't have to know ahead of time. It doesn't apply the same sort of expectations from the data format that like a normal flow does with inputs defined on its start step. So I'd recommend looking at this flow behavior if you want to just post kind of arbitrary data to a flow, if that makes sense.
Okay. So it's a data pair like a value pair that I can.
Now you can also, we do have a data pair data type. So if you wanted to build a normal flow, and in that flow on the start step, you wanted to come create data and you wanted to create, I'll just call this thing DP list. I'll search for pair and find data pair and list and then save this. Now, if I if I allow me if I configure integration here and call this as a service, save this, and then open up my service definition tab, it's going to show me like I have the ability here under DP list, I can pass in data pairs into that flow and as a list. So this might be another option if you're really specifically trying to call data pairs.
Yeah, this is what I was looking for.
Yep, and then you just get a data pair list. If we look at Data Explorer, you just have a data pair list that you can then interact with in your flow. And all the other authentication, unlike post to flow, which has some differences in terms of how you authenticate it, the normal pattern of using the normal authentication patterns or options apply here. And then you just get a list and you can just deal with that data pair list however you might be dealing with it in a flow.
Can I like pass it to a truth table, and in the truth table, in those columns, can I use it like have each key represent as a column? The truth table.
Like pass each item in the data pair list to a truth table?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
or pass the entire array, and so that basically forms like a composite data structure. Right? So can I pass it to a truth table and then refer to each?
Yeah, you could imagine doing something like this. This might not be exactly what you're asking, but we could just rough this in and see. So I put a for each step here. I'll pass in my data pair collection. So I'll get a data pair out. And then here, I could create a truth table that I could create on my truth table. I could have input data of type data pair. I don't know that I would do that, but we could. I'll just call it data pair. That's the data name. The type, again, I'll search for pair and find data pair.
A list.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Can I pass a list of data pairs to the truth table and use each item in the list as a column?
Can you use each item in the list as a column? Do you know the length of the list?
Yeah. Assuming I already know, which ones I'm looking for. Like if there are.
Yeah. You could do this, but you won't. There's no like. You'd have to deal with it almost like you'd have to pull items out of the. You'd have to use like get index of item or get item by index type steps.
So is it a get item by name?
Yeah. So you could. So let's get to closer to your idea here. If I search for index, I'm just going to say get index of. I'm going to get item by index. Let's assume I know I pass these in a certain order, of course, right? So my list type is pair. So this. My list type is pair. Item index is 1. My list is DP list. And then let's assume I was going to just copy this and then do item index like for 2. These would be named differently. Where's my output name? So this is called, I'll just say this first, I'll just name this first item. Second item. Now that I've pulled those out of the list as discrete values, I would come to my truth table and I wouldn't set up data pair as my input. I would have yeah. Oh man, not going to be, I don't know that I like this, but this would be, I'll call this first item and it can be a data pair. That's fine. And this is second item. It could be a data pair as well. I don't know that I can get, I might be able to. So here, my first is going to be first item name or first item value equals reading these as numbers, that's fine. And then I could select, where are we at? Maybe not. Maybe we can't do this gracefully, or this is less graceful than I was expecting. It wants us to put a value in here. Maybe add, so what is it? Can you give me a little bit better idea about what is, you want to pass a data pair list instead of an object in, but can I ask why?
I was just wondering, I mean, do I always have to predefine all the data structures that I want to? I mostly use decisions as the rules engine that I use in APIs. And yeah, I'm just curious, you know, if I always have to pre-decide what structure I want the access to be created data types and use that rigidly, or can I just, you know, pass in like a generic payload of key value pairs and then in input tables, the value is present, and I'll use it in the condition otherwise.
Yeah, so you'd want to check like the data pair would actually be one object. There's some, right, like one payload to check, and you'd want to check the value of, you know, check the value of the property with property name A.
Yeah,
See if
just
it
like
was
a data type, instead of defining a data type, would I use a collection of data pairs?
Mhm.
Right, just the way that I would use a data.
Yeah, you can't do it on the column level here. I mean, you could loop through these data pairs if you wanted to check them, but I don't think I think ultimately it's going to be more work here this way than it would be just to define a simple flow structure for your input and then call it with that, call the rule with that particular format. Because you can control, you can have as few or as many fields on that input as you want. So you can pass in data pairs. You can get item. You can deal with the data pairs as individuals. So you could start tying up, like you could start patterning up like item by index with like string equals or number greater than, like type behaviors if you're wanting to implement something more abstract here. But I would say it's probably going to be more work than benefit, if I had to guess.
Okay, I'll explore it. It's good to know that there's something already in it. So, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for us today? Okay. All right. I think that's it for us then. Thanks everyone for the questions. And I'll be back same time tomorrow. Have a great afternoon, everyone.